Well, for more on the situation in Libya, let's speak to Sami Hamdi. He's the editor-in-chief of International Interest. That's a current affairs analysis magazine, and he joins us now live from London. Sami, let's start with this suggestion from Putin that he wants to broker some sort of a compromise here. How seriously will the Libyans take his offer, given that there are ostensibly Russian mercenaries on the ground in Libya, fighting against the UN-recognised government?
I think Haftar will think that the Russians are serious. It's well known that Russia doesn't see Libya as a conflict of vital importance for it. Libya for Russia is simply a pressure point to use against the Turks to get some concessions out of the Turks, whether that's in Syria or any other point of conflict, and to pressure the US in terms of trying to exert itself, Russia exerting itself as the new superpower. We've seen that in Syria. It saved Bashar al-Assad. It's starting to court the Middle East states. Russia wants to be seen as this alternative superpower. So it's backed Haftar with weaponry and mercenaries over the last 3 months that have allowed Haftar to push into Tripoli. However, it seems that following negotiations with Turkey, following discussions with Erdogan, after seeing that Turkey is sincere or is serious about sending troops to Libya in order to save Sarraj's government, the Russians have thought, look, at the end of the day, I'm not going to win Libya, but I can exert my influence and outdo the US in Libya. So I think Russians are serious about this idea of mediation, and Haftar will be very worried about these statements.
Well, let's talk about the timing of all of this, because this offensive has been underway for, by my calculations, 8 months now. So why are we seeing this renewed interest at this moment from Turkey and Russia? And could it turn the tide of the battle?
I think when we say renewed interest, it might be renewed interest because Libya is back in the headlines. But let's remember that the reason that Sarraj's government is still standing is because it is Turkish drones that have prevented Haftar's forces from entering Tripoli. Turkish military advisors are helping Sarraj as it is. I think now that the talk is out in the open, when Sarraj realizes that now it's a matter of survival, he's doing this last roll of the dice in order to get the Turks to come in and save him. And let's also remember that for Turkey, their interest is not Libya itself. Anybody who looks at a map of the Mediterranean will see that Egypt to Turkey's south, South Cyprus, Greece, and potentially Libya, if it falls under Haftar and therefore goes into the UAE orbit, is forming a sort of maritime chokehold onto Turkey. For Turkey, Libya is the final chance to prevent this chokehold from taking place. And this is why I argue that Libya is just as important for Turkey as Syria. Turkey knows that if it doesn't move, if it doesn't rescue Sarraj's government, then it will suffer dramatically in the Mediterranean when it finds itself surrounded by these anti-Turkey countries. So when we're talking about why now, why is Turkey talking about sending troops now, it is because Sarraj is really struggling. And I think another proof that Sarraj is struggling is that Misrata, who are undermining him for years, have now sent reinforcements to help him because they don't want Haftar to take over Tripoli. Zintan, which undermined all of the parties, is now sending reinforcements to Tripoli because it believes that Haftar may actually take Tripoli. So given that these militias all realize that if Haftar wins, it's game over for all of them, they're all suddenly uniting. And given that Sarraj is on the verge of losing, according at least to the Turks' analysis, the Turks believe it is imperative to send troops. Russia doesn't want to enter into a full engagement with the Turks. And Russia was never keen on, in the first place, of Haftar fully taking over Libya, because if Haftar takes over Libya, if you're Putin, the primary influence would be the UAE and Egypt, which backed Haftar throughout this whole 8 years of fighting. UAE is a US ally, and Haftar knows that if he has to choose between Russia and the US, all roads lead to Washington with regards to any of the Libyan factions. So Russia doesn't trust Haftar. However, Russia now feels that if it can come across as a mediator, it will have solved the situation in Syria from its perspective. It will have solved the situation in Libya, and it will now be able to convince the Middle East states that Trump, who's about to be impeached, I don't think it will go through the second round, but Trump, who's under threat, US, which is retreating, I am the new power, come to Moscow. All roads should lead to Moscow. And I think Russia and Turkey will agree on Libya, and this is why we'll see that Haftar won't take Tripoli.
A very, very complicated proxy conflict there. Sami Hamdi from International Interest, thank you for joining us on Al Jazeera. Well, let's go to